Octavia threw the silk scarf first. It struck Cassidy Hale Stowe across the cheek before she could raise her hand, and the fabric, ivory, soft, one her mother had given her before she died, slipped from Cassidy's fingers and landed on the marble terrace floor between them. No one moved to pick it up. Cassidy Hale Stowe, 36, wife of Griffin Stowe and daughter-in-law to the Stowe family, stood on the upper terrace of the Stowe Grand Miami, the flagship property of the Stowe hospitality empire, while her mother-in-law opened her weekend bag and continued pulling out her belongings. A blouse, a cardigan, a pair of shoes Cassidy had owned since she was 28. Clement Stowe, 67, Griffin's father and public chairman of Stowe Grand Hotels, lifted a framed wedding photograph from the bag and set it face down on the terrace railing without explanation. Griffin Stowe, 40, husband of Cassidy and executive director of Stowe Grand, watched from beside the glass doors. He did not step forward. Beside him stood Ava Delacroix, 32, vice president of brand development at Stowe Grand, and the woman who had been sharing Griffin's corporate suite for the past 4 months. Ava was smiling. "You walked into this family with empty hands," Octavia said. She dropped the folded blouse onto the tile. "You can leave the same way." Cassidy touched her cheek where the scarf had struck her. The skin burned. She looked at her husband. "Griffin." He looked away. "Don't make this into something it isn't," he said. Halston Greer, 59, the Stowe family's personal attorney, placed 2 documents on the terrace table: a divorce petition, a proposed settlement protecting inherited assets on both sides. Griffin picked up the pen. He did not look at Cassidy when he signed his name. The Stowe family believed the quiet woman in the simple linen dress owned nothing, that she had no connections powerful enough to matter, that she had come into their world with her plain background and her dead father's sentimental savings, and she would leave the same way. They did not know that Cassidy's father, Corvin Hale, had been one of the most quietly powerful hospitality investors in the country. They did not know he had spent 30 years building Hale Capital Group, a private holding company that owned stakes in commercial real estate, hotel infrastructure, and financing vehicles used by the luxury hospitality industry. They did not know that when Corvin died, he placed everything inside the Hale Capital Trust, naming Cassidy as its sole beneficiary. And they certainly did not know that the Hale Capital Trust controlled 72% of Stowe Grand Hotels. 16 months earlier, Cassidy had quietly saved the Stowe empire from collapse. The family had over-leveraged 3 new properties in 1 year, and when the credit market tightened, they could not cover their obligations. The primary lender threatened to accelerate the debt. 2 flagship properties faced foreclosure. Hundreds of employees were at risk. Cassidy had called her attorney at 11 o'clock at night and authorized the trust to begin acquiring Stowe Grand's distressed debt. She restructured the financing before sunrise. She allowed Clement to remain public chairman while the company stabilized, because removing him publicly would have triggered a press collapse that hurt the employees before it hurt the family. She had done all of it while Griffin slept. When Griffin signed the divorce petition on that Miami terrace, with Ava standing beside him and his mother throwing his wife's belongings across the floor, he believed he had cut a woman with nothing loose from his future. He had separated himself from the woman whose hidden fortune had been keeping his family's hotels open for 16 months. 7 weeks later, when Clement arrived at the Stowe Grand corporate offices for a scheduled leadership announcement, his keycard did not work. Neither did Griffin's. The first time Cassidy understood what Stowe Grand Hotels actually owed her trust, she was sitting in her father's office 3 weeks after his funeral. Corvin Hale had kept a small oil painting above his desk, a narrow street in Savannah, Georgia, where he had worked as a bellman at 22 years old, carrying luggage for guests who never once looked him in the eye. He held onto that painting through every acquisition, every expansion. Every year the company grew beyond anything he could have imagined as a young man in a uniform. He kept it there. He once told Cassidy, so he would never confuse having money with deserving respect. "Real power doesn't need to announce itself," he had said. "The people who respect you only after they learn what you own never respected you at all." Cassidy had not lied to Griffin before their marriage. She told him her father had left her a private trust with significant assets under professional management. Griffin had nodded and asked no further questions. He assumed she meant a modest inheritance. Real estate, perhaps, some index funds, something sensible but small. She lived simply. She wore clothes without visible labels. She drove a 5-year-old car and brought her own coffee to morning meetings. He had never considered that her simplicity was a choice. When Clement demanded a prenuptial agreement before the wedding, Cassidy signed without objection. The document protected inherited assets on both sides. Clement believed he was shielding the Stowe estate from a woman of modest means. He had unknowingly built a legal wall that would one day protect Hale Capital from his own son. What Cassidy had not told Griffin was the scale. Not because she wanted to deceive him, she had told him the truth. He had decided without asking that the truth was small. The crisis that nearly broke Stowe Grand happened on a Tuesday morning in January. Cassidy had been in their kitchen when Griffin came home. It was past midnight. He had taken off his jacket in the elevator, and he was still holding it when he sat down on the kitchen floor, his back against the cabinet below the counter, his face slack. "We can't cover the balloon payment," he said. She sat beside him on the floor, not at the table, not in a chair. She sat on the tile with her shoulder against his. He told her what was coming: the debt, the deadline, the lender's patience already exhausted, the flagship properties, 340 employees across 2 hotels, the kitchen and maintenance workers, the front desk staff who had been there for 15-20 years, his father's name on the building. She held his hand until he stopped shaking. He fell asleep before midnight. She waited until his breathing was steady. Then she went to her office and called Iris Tate, her private counsel and one of 2 people who fully understood the scope of the Hale Capital Trust. "Begin the acquisition," Cassidy said. Iris was quiet for a moment. "Once we start, they'll know Hale Capital exists." "They'll know Hale Capital saved them," Cassidy said. "They won't know it belongs to me." By 4 in the morning, the restructuring framework was in place. By the time Griffin woke up and made coffee, the lender had received a formal proposal. By the time Clement called an emergency board meeting, Hale Capital Group had emerged as the rescue investor. Griffin called it a miracle. Cassidy smiled and said nothing. Calderon, 54, Hale Capital's lead independent director, and the man who had served alongside Corvin for 18 years, had warned Cassidy more than once that her silence carried its own risks. "People fill in what they don't know," he had told her. "Your husband will fill it in wrong." She had known he was right. What she hadn't known was that Griffin had already begun filling it in with Ava Delacroix. The first sign was small, an ease between them at a brand strategy meeting, practiced, fluent, the kind of familiarity that doesn't come from professional proximity alone. Cassidy filed it without acting on it. She told herself she could be wrong. The second sign was the bracelet. 3 months before the Miami trip, Griffin had asked Cassidy to help choose a retirement gift for a longtime board member. He described her as a woman who disliked heavy jewelry, who preferred understated pieces. Cassidy spent an hour on the selection. She chose a thin gold chain with a small pendant, a hotel key, delicate, the kind of detail that would mean something to someone who had spent decades in hospitality. 2 weeks later, she saw the same chain on Ava's wrist at a company dinner. She didn't see the engraving until later. She wasn't even looking for it. She was watching Griffin top off Ava's wine glass before his own wife's, the way a man does when the habit has already formed and he's stopped tracking it. That night, she found the jeweler's email in Griffin's sent folder. The engraving read, "For A, the next chapter starts here G." She closed the laptop and went to bed. She did not sleep. The weekend at the Miami flagship was billed as a family reconciliation. Octavia had called Cassidy personally, warm in the way she only was when she wanted something. "Come down. We need to settle things between us before anything gets worse. No cameras, no staff beyond what's necessary, just family." Willa Crane, 29, Cassidy's executive assistant and one of the only people who knew her true identity, drove her to the airport. "You don't trust them," Willa said. "I trust what I already know," Cassidy said. "I'm going to hear what Griffin chooses to say without an audience coaching him." The hotel looked the way it always did, beautiful and designed to make you feel like less of yourself if you hadn't earned your way inside. Cassidy had always found that ironic, given who actually owned it. The property manager, a soft-spoken man named Aldrin, who had worked at Stowe Grand for 22 years, greeted her in the lobby with genuine warmth. He had always been that way, not because he owed her anything. That was simply how he treated people. The first hour at the hotel was almost believable. Then Cassidy noticed that Ava's name was on the weekend guest list, placed in the suite adjoining Griffin's. At dinner, her place card had been moved to the far end of the table. Ava sat where Cassidy usually sat, beside Griffin, and Octavia introduced her to a vendor partner as someone who truly understands what this brand is trying to become. Cassidy ate quietly and said nothing. Afterward, she asked Griffin to speak with her, privately, on the upper terrace. "I saw the bracelet," she said. "Don't pretend you don't know which one." He didn't pretend. What he did instead was worse. He told her the marriage had grown quiet, that Ava challenged him, that Cassidy had never understood the pressure of running a company at this level, the ambition it required, the kind of partner a future CEO needed beside him. "You've always been comfortable staying small," he said. Cassidy heard those words land somewhere specific inside her chest, not because they were true, because he believed they were. She had spent 6 years making herself smaller in that marriage. She had attended his family's dinners and absorbed their comments about her background, her father's business, which they imagined was modest because she never corrected them. She had held Griffin through his worst fear, and then quietly fixed the thing he was afraid of, and she had never told him because she wanted to know who he was without the knowledge of what she could do for him. She had her answer now. "Did you ever love me?" she asked. He looked at the water. Ava appeared in the doorway behind him. "He deserves someone who can actually stand beside him," she said, as though Cassidy had invited the response. Cassidy looked at them both. Then she turned and went to her room and began folding her things into the weekend bag. The next morning, Octavia unfolded them. The terrace confrontation lasted less than 12 minutes. Octavia emptied the bag piece by piece. Clement made 3 comments about Cassidy having brought nothing into the family. Griffin signed both documents. Ava stood close enough to touch his arm. Aldrin witnessed part of it from inside the suite. He said nothing outwardly, but the upper terrace was one of 6 spaces covered by the hotel's exterior security system, a requirement under the Stowe Grand insurance policy for all penthouse-level areas. The footage was automatically preserved to an off-site server before Clement could reach the security office. Aldrin made a note of the timestamp. A junior housekeeper named Faye had seen Octavia throw the scarf. Faye was 18 months into a job she was trying to keep. She stood in the doorway with fresh towels and didn't move until Clement pointed at her. "Back inside," he said. She went. Later that evening, she wrote down what she had seen in a small spiral notebook. She wasn't sure why, she just felt like someone should. Cassidy left through the service corridor. Willa was waiting in the parking structure. She didn't speak until they were on the highway. Then Willa reached across the center console and held her hand, and Cassidy let herself shake for a few minutes before she stopped. "Who hit you?" Iris said. She was already reaching for her phone when Cassidy explained. "The scarf, the metal clasp on the bag strap that had caught Cassidy's jaw when it swung." Iris photographed the mark before it faded. "I'm filing preservation notices for the hotel's security system tonight," she said. "Don't move on Hale Capital yet," Cassidy said. "Let Calder's team finish the audit first. Once we go public, there's no walking it back." "Cassidy, they struck you with your own belongings and threatened the employees who stepped forward to help you." "I know." "Then explain to me why we're waiting." Cassidy looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Stowe Grand's morning housekeeping shift was coming on. People who drove 40 minutes to work, who packed their own lunches, who had been with the company for years, people who had nothing to do with what happened on that terrace. "Protect the company first," she said. "Protect the employees, then let the evidence speak." Iris lowered the phone. She said, "We do it your way." The audit had been running for 3 weeks before the Miami weekend. What it found went further than Cassidy had expected. Griffin had been charging personal trips with Ava to the brand development budget. 17 flights over 11 months. 4 hotel stays billed as market research. Octavia had arranged private events at 2 Stowe Grand properties using company accounts, the expenses buried in hospitality codes. Clement had approved a personal renovation project at the family's Connecticut home using a Stowe Grand contractor and billing it against a capital improvement line item. And Hollis Khan, 44, the company's chief financial officer and Clement's hand-picked loyalist, had restructured 3 vendor payments to delay a quarterly disclosure to Hale Capital's representatives, buying the family time to complete a leadership announcement before anyone from the controlling shareholder could respond. The planned announcement: Griffin Stowe named Chief Executive of Stowe Grand Hotels, Ava Delacroix promoted to Chief Brand Officer, a new era for the Stowe family. The announcement was scheduled for the morning. Clement's protected chairmanship expired. Cassidy read through the full audit file on a Thursday night in the Hale Capital executive apartment, a space the Stowe family had never seen that she had used for years to manage the trust's operations. Floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, no Stowe family photographs anywhere. She called Calder at 11:15. "The board is ready," he said. "Are the employees protected?" He opened an operational report. Payroll was funded for 8 months. Vendor contracts were secured. No position in housekeeping, maintenance, food service, or front desk would be touched because of what was coming. Then, proceed, she said. She drafted the employee message herself. She wanted the people who made the beds and carried the luggage and ran the kitchens to hear from her before they read about it anywhere else. She wanted them to know that what was about to change was not their jobs, but the name on the door of the room at the top. On the morning Clement's chairmanship expired, he arrived at the Stowe Grand corporate offices in a black car with Griffin and Ava. His keycard flashed red at the executive entrance. He tried it twice, then Griffin tried his, same result. Clement called the security desk. The officer who answered, a man who had worked for Stowe Grand for 9 years, told him that executive access had been suspended pending a compliance review and board transition. Clement said, "This is my company." The officer said, "Sir, the board has directed this." "I am the board." "Not as of midnight, sir." Clement struck the security glass with his palm. Ava whispered something to Griffin. Griffin dialed Hollis. Hollis didn't answer. Hollis was already in a separate room with Hale Capital's outside counsel, handing over financial records under a preservation order. A small group of industry reporters had gathered near the main entrance. They were there for the scheduled announcement. Hale Capital's transition disclosure, which Calder had arranged through proper channels. They were not there for the Stowe family, but Clement's voice was carrying now, and the cameras turned. Calder walked out through the main entrance with Iris and 2 independent board members beside him. Then Cassidy came out behind them. She wore a grey blazer and flat shoes. Her hair was down. She carried nothing that announced who she was. She didn't need to. Griffin saw her before anyone spoke. He looked at her the way a person looks at something that doesn't fit the version of events they have been living inside. Confused, then still, then deeply unsure of themselves. Calder addressed the family. "This is Cassidy Hale Stowe, controlling owner and CEO of Hale Capital Group through the Hale Capital Trust. Hale Capital owns 72% of Stowe Grand Hotel's voting shares." Octavia said, "That is not possible." "It is documented," Calder said. Clement's face moved through several things quickly. Disbelief, then recognition, then something that looked almost like calculation, checking to see if there was still a move. "Her father left her a small fund," he said. He turned to Griffin. "You told me." Griffin looked at Cassidy. "You told me it was modest." "I told you my father left me a trust," she said. "You decided what that meant." Calder handed Clement a certified copy of the transition notice. His protected chairmanship had ended at midnight. An independent chair had been appointed. Executives identified in the audit were suspended pending final review. Clement did not take the document. Calder set it on the hood of the car. The reporters moved closer. No one in the Stowe family moved at all. Griffin asked to speak with her privately. She agreed. Not because the marriage could be saved, she already knew it couldn't. She agreed because she needed him to understand, before she closed that door permanently, that what he had lost had begun long before his keycard stopped working. They stood in a small conference room off the main corridor. Through the glass wall, she could see the reporters, the security officer who had held his position without flinching, the board members she had trusted to follow the evidence without her in the room. "You let me believe you had nothing," Griffin said. "I told you the truth. You chose your interpretation. If I had known, then it wouldn't have told me anything." She looked at him steadily. "That's why I didn't perform it for you. I wanted to know who you were when you thought I couldn't help you." He sat down. For the first time since she had known him, the confidence was entirely gone. He looked like the man who had sat on the kitchen floor that January night, frightened, reduced, genuinely unsure. "I came home that night believing everything was finished," he said quietly. "I know. I was there. And then Hale Capital appeared the next morning, and I thought strangers had saved us. I saved the employees from what would have happened to them," she said. "I protected 340 people from the consequences of choices none of them had made." He pressed his hands together on the table. "Is there anything?" "No," she said. "It was not unkind. It was just the truth, stated cleanly." She reached into her jacket pocket and set a small object on the table between them. A gold key charm, the one her father had given her when she turned 30, the year Corvin had finally shown her the full scope of the trust. Every door that matters, he had told her, you already hold the key to. "I needed to see what you'd choose when you believed I held nothing," she said. "Now we both know." She left the room without looking back. The consequences did not arrive through one dramatic order. They came the way real accountability comes, through audits, preservation notices, lender reviews, civil claims, and documents bearing Clement's own signature. Griffin's termination was finalized after the independent committee completed its review. Cassidy had disclosed her marriage, recused herself from any vote touching Griffin's employment, and left the room before the committee discussed him. Every consequence came from the evidence, not from her. Ava's employment ended the same morning. The documented records of falsified expenses and undisclosed conflicts were not subjects of interpretation. Hollis faced separate financial claims for redirecting operational funds. Octavia's use of company accounts for personal events appeared in recovery filings. The corporate jet, which Clement had used as though it were a family vehicle, was grounded while manifest records were audited. Octavia made a brief attempt to reframe the story publicly. Comments to a journalist about a daughter-in-law who had hidden her identity, about a family deceived by a quiet woman who was not what she appeared. The attempt collapsed when the journalist's verification call reached Iris, who provided enough context about the preserved security footage, Faye's written statement, and the audit record that the story was never published. The story that had already been written was simply stronger than the one Octavia wanted to tell. 3 months after the transition, Cassidy stood at the front of the Stowe Grand's main maintenance facility with Calder and Bet Forsyth, 51, the company's new interim CEO. A hospitality operations veteran who had spent 14 years at Stowe Grand, watching the family treat the company like a personal account, and had said nothing, because she needed the job, and because no one had given her a reason to believe saying something would matter. Now she had been given the reason. The room was full of people who had been there long before the Stowe name meant anything. A man named Otto, who had been a line cook at the flagship for 19 years, spoke first. He said that in January of the previous year, when word of the company's debt had filtered down to the kitchen staff, he had come home and told his wife they might lose their insurance. "We didn't lose it," he said. "I didn't know why until last month." Cassidy said she was glad. A senior housekeeper named Rosalind, who had been with the hotel for 26 years, told Cassidy that the staff had noticed she was different, that she always said good morning to the cleaning crew when the executives walked past without looking. "We didn't know what to make of you," Rosalind said. "Now we do." Cassidy looked at the room. She thought about her father's painting, the narrow Savannah street, the young man carrying luggage for people who never once looked at him. "No company belongs to the name on its sign," she said. "It belongs to the people who show up and do the work. That's what I want this to be from now on." The applause was not dramatic. It was warm and real, and came from people who had spent years waiting for someone to say exactly that. The divorce was finalized quietly, under the separate property terms both attorneys had already agreed on. The prenuptial agreement Clement had demanded to protect the Stowe estate from a woman he believed had done precisely what it was designed to do. It had simply turned out that the inherited asset requiring protection was not Clement's. A letter arrived at Hale Capital's offices 4 months after the settlement was signed. Griffin's handwriting. No return address. He did not make excuses. He did not ask her to reconsider. He wrote that he had spent a long time sitting with the distance between the night he cried on the kitchen floor and the morning he signed the divorce petition, and that the only honest thing he could say was that both versions of himself had been real, and he had chosen the wrong one. Cassidy read the letter twice. She placed it in the same drawer as the gold key charm her father had given her. Not because she needed to hold on to it, but because accountability, even when it arrives too late, still means something. On the first evening she had entirely to herself, she sat on the balcony of the Hale Capital apartment and watched the planes move across the darkening sky. She thought about her father driving her to her first hospitality internship in Atlanta. She had been 22. She asked him why he never corrected people who underestimated him in lobbies and boarding lines, people who spoke to him like he was less. He had said, "Because I didn't need them to know, I already knew." She had spent 6 years in a marriage hiding what she knew, waiting to see what Griffin would choose. She had her answer. It had cost her something she couldn't fully name. Not the money, not the title, something older than both of those. What she had lost was the version of him she had married. Before he knew she was watching, Griffin had once offered his coat to a woman waiting outside the hotel in January rain because the valet had lost her ticket and no one was helping her. That man had been real. He had existed. That was what made it hurt the way it did. She had not invented him. She had loved a real person and then watched that person make, one at a time, a long series of choices that brought him somewhere she could not follow. She didn't feel victorious. She felt clear. Her phone showed a message from Calder. The employee profit-sharing program had been approved by the board. Enrollment would open the following month. Cassidy looked out at the city below, the hotels, the towers, the ordinary places where people showed up for each other without anyone watching and without anyone handing out prizes for it. Her father had built something real because he never forgot what it felt like to carry other people's bags. She intended to do the same. She closed the message, turned off the light, and let the night go quiet around her.